We have today Dr. Rahel Zulliger as part of our special guest series for the unspoken secrets of being an international scholar. And Dr. Zulliger is presently in Europe, so we are in different time zone, but it's so good of her to be part of this. And we'll let Rahel introduce herself first, and then we will probably move on to the questions.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Rahel Zulliger. As you already said, I was born and raised in Switzerland, in Europe, and I now work at a pharma company here in Basel called Roche, and I am a research project manager there.
Great. Thank you so much, Rahel. And I have known Rahel from before while she was still in the US. So we were wondering if for those scholars who are probably thinking of transitioning from Europe to US and also maybe from US to Europe, if you can tell us what different career stages you have been since PhD and in which countries.
Yeah, so that's actually a short list. I did my PhD here in Switzerland, where I also studied. And after I did get my PhD, I moved to the United States for my postdoc studies. That's pretty much it. So then after that, I did move back to Switzerland, where I work now at Roche.
So how long you have been stay in the United States? Is it like during the postdoc period only?
Yes, it was a postdoc period thing. So I was there for 6 years at 2 different universities. First in University of Oklahoma, and then the University of Houston.
Okay. So do you know what University of Houston? So what department you're at?
I think that was biomedical engineering or something like that. Something completely different from what you would think it is.
I see. So I have a next question is like, when and what are the reasons you decided to go back home?
Yeah, so I have to say in my career, the decisions are always a bit connected to serendipity. So it's always like, it's always when opportunities pop up is when decisions are made in my case. So when I moved to Houston after 5 years in Oklahoma, I always kind of started thinking about my future, because if you've been a postdoc for 5 years, it's time to think about it.
Okay.
So I did think about going back before too, but I didn't mind staying in the US. But as you can probably imagine, it's difficult, especially in academia, to find a job other than a postdoc.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a decision of like just to start looking, and that's where serendipity struck. So I opened up the Arvo job page, and the first job that popped up was a research scientist at Roche, and they were looking for somebody in the ophthalmology department, and the job description was pretty much me reading it like, that's me. So awesome. I looked at it and I was like, if I don't apply for this job, this would be really stupid. Yes. So I applied for it. I got an interview the week after, and they literally hired me off the spot. So that's pretty much what happened. It's, to be perfectly honest, not a lot of thinking from my side. It was just like that one decision to go look for jobs, and that's pretty much what it was.
So do you think the transitioning from the academia to industry, was that a tricky thing for you? Or like you said, it was a serendipity thing, but the position you applied was of an industry position, right?
Yes.
So did you have any inhibitions or thoughts, and how did they turn up when in practicality?
I think we all have that inhibition at the beginning when we look at industry jobs, but we also all think about it, right? Because one of the things that everybody thinks, and that is true, is you do get paid better in industry. I don't think that's a secret anymore. But a lot of people have like misgivings on what industry jobs look like, and so did I. So the one major thing in industry is you're no longer the generalist. So when you work in academia, you're pretty much everything. You're a biologist, you're a surgeon, you're a pharmacist, you're a chemist, you're an animal caretaker, the biostatistician, you're everything. So you do everything on your own, and it is expected of you to solve every problem pretty much on your own. I mean, you have a team to discuss things with, but technically your problem is your problem. And the biggest difference to that is when you go to industry is for every problem, you have a specialist. So you're not actually supposed to be doing all by yourself. You're supposed to ask the person who knows how to do it. So this was the biggest thing for me, because in the beginning, I had this like mindset where I was like, oh, I have to solve this problem. And it took me 2 to 3 years to figure out, no, I don't have to solve this problem. I just have to find the person who can solve this problem. So this is the biggest change, I think, from an academia job to industry. Industry doesn't want you to be a generalist. They want you to be the specialist you are.
Okay.
So the job responsibilities are as exactly what they are in the advertisement. There are not any hidden responsibilities expected of you.
Pretty much. On the other hand, though, they do expect you to be a learner, to learn new things, but in your area. They don't expect you to become like an MBA on the side. So they do expect you to, like, you know, in your specialty, to kind of, you know, broaden your knowledge, and to go, like, you know, also sideways and understand things on the side. But they do not expect you to understand you know, for example, like drug laws, because, you know, in America, like if you work in a lab, you always have to understand, for example, how to like order certain like chemicals and drugs. Nobody expects you to do that in industry. There's specialists for that.
So I have a next question. Is like, I know you stay in United States for 6 years, and then what visa status were you at, and were you like, when you're doing the academic field, have you ever thought of like stay in United States for a longer time period?
Yeah, so that's actually the question that was kind of popping up right when I moved to Houston, because at that point I had been on a J1 visa for 5 years, which is the maximum you can have. So right before I moved to Houston, I applied for an H1B, which was granted, and I could have technically stayed on that one for another 5 years. But at that point in time, if I wouldn't have left, I would have applied for a green card, because it's just the easier thing to do. And, you know, it can take a little time to get one. So it's always a good thing to start early.
Yeah.
Okay, but going back to your joining the industry and how your experience has been in there, because I guess there are some concept of going like vertically or horizontally up the ladder in industry, right? So especially in big companies, people think it's very different from smaller companies. So can you give us some inputs on that? What are your thoughts? What have you seen or experienced?
So that's actually one of the biggest differences on how jobs are, how people like move in industry compared to like academia, right? Because in academia, as a postdoc, there's literally pretty much one career path, and that's up. So you can try to become an associate professor, and then for the rest of your life hunt down tenure that you will never achieve. So that's pretty much the only way. There's no side routes. There's no different, like, you know, specialties that you could go into. In industry, that's completely different, because in industry, there's so many more jobs associated with your field that moving sideways is extremely easy, and it's encouraged, in fact. So there is options to like do rotations in other departments. There's options to, you know, just, you know, do like a 20% like thing on the side in a different department if you feel like that is going to help you move sideways, if you want to do that. So that's actually what I did. I moved sideways because I was a research scientist in drug discovery, and now I'm a project manager, which is not technically up. It's more like slightly, like, you know, sideways up.
Yeah.
Right. So my next question is, what are the pros and cons in industry versus academia?
That's actually something I had to think about for a bit, because it's not actually as much as you would think. The difference is really not that big. And
Okay.
people do have a misgivings about that are just simply not true. And you will hear it from both sides, right? People will claim one and the other. But if you've worked in both places, the difference actually like minimal. I mean,
Oh,
again,
okay.
the pay is better in industry because they have to compete for talent, and they don't get like the cheap postdocs, which is also only partially true. We actually do have postdocs in industry, so you can have a 3-year postdoc at Roche if you would feel like to do that. But I think the one thing that people are scared about is that in industry we're not allowed to share science, which is true to a certain degree, because we are having like, you have IP rights, and there's a certain, let's just say people are more cautious about talking about things. But it doesn't mean that we don't publish. We do publish. We do go to conferences. It might be a little less, and people are more careful on what they're talking about. But especially for basic science stuff, we do collaborate. We do talk to people. We do go to conferences. And we also do basic science.
So
it's not that we just, it's
funding, like you don't need to worry about funding.
That's the other thing. And to be perfectly honest, like, well, people will be like, well, in industry, everything is about the business. It's just a business case, which is true to a certain degree, sure, because we have to make money. But let's face it, everybody who has like submitted a grant proposal lately knows that is also happening in academia. Like, you have to think about what your business case is if you want to get funding. You can't just talk about some obscure field nobody cares about. You will not get funding. So it's exactly the same thing. You need to have a business case.
Okay, wow, great. So would you say you miss something in academia which you don't find in the industry?
Yeah, well, maybe
your experience says so. It's very tough to find.
It's probably that things are maybe a little easier every once in a while, because in academia the rules are not as strict for certain things, and you can still mess around with things that you probably shouldn't in academia. So but also that actually changes now, and I mean, in academia the rules are getting stricter and stricter of what you can actually do. So I think the difference there is also going smaller.
And it depends on the PI and the lab as well, which is very drastically different, I guess, in academia, while in industry there is more of a uniformity, whichever smaller or bigger company you are, irrespective of that, I guess.
Yeah, and that's because we're actually judged by the public very differently, right? If there is something happening at the universities, be like, well, they're researchers, what can you do? And if anything happens at a pharma industry, we get judged really harshly, even though it might be the same reason and the same accident. So so they have to be more careful.
Okay, so the next question is like, do you think the postdoc training can help the transition for your current job? Do you think like you would suggest people, you might not necessarily have the postdoc training after your PhD graduation, probably you can just go directly from industry, or like postdoc training can actually help you to establish more about your fundamental knowledge, and then you can go to industry. What is your opinion?
Actually, I personally really enjoyed my postdoctoral time, and I think it's a great experience for people to do it, because it will probably allow you to go to a different country. You will learn to do things differently by, like, sometimes duct taping things together just because there's no money to replace it. It gives you a great insight into how things really work. I think it's great to do a postdoc in academia. It's a good preparation for later life, because you kind of get pretty good at, doing things from scratch, getting things together like that might have just been offered to you in an industry job, where you don't really have to do it, where money isn't the issue, right? That's a big thing. So you learn how to do things with less money. And that's never a bad thing. I think that's a life school that everybody could use.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we have the last question for you. And do you have any tips that you want to share with like young investigators if they are planning to transition from like PhD postdoc to industry internationally?
Yes, I think the biggest thing is get a job before you move. It does make things way easier with, visa applications and moving, because otherwise you're going to be in an eternal limbo to get a job. So try to get a job first. They will help you get a visa if you have a job, and they're willing to do that. And the second thing is, I think what people are still afraid of sometimes when you see the job ads that industry puts out, because they look a little different than from academia. It just says like postdoc in the field of, right? That's pretty much it. And if you look at the industry ads, they have like very detailed, this is what we want you to be, this we want what we want you to be able to do. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't apply for it, even if it doesn't completely cover what you can do or what your experience is, because they actually put a lot more emphasis in you being able to adapt and to be willing to learn. So the industry is looking for people who are willing to get into a job, not who are already perfect at it.
Okay.
So that's the bigger emphasis. So don't be afraid to apply for it, even if you feel like I can't do that. Like, doesn't matter, just apply for it. The worst thing that can happen is you don't get the job.
So the follow-up question is like, is it like a different prepare the resume differently compared when you applying for the industry job and postdoc? Because it's like postdoc, you can just send your CV with a list of publication, lectures, services. But then is that like a preparation for industry CV or resume is going to be way different?
No, I don't think so. I think your resume, your CV can be like pretty much the same thing. Maybe it makes sense to put a little more emphasis in like the letter you put in there by, if you're telling them like, hey, I might not be like what the perfect candidate looks like, but I am very good at like, getting into new things and I am willing to do this and that, then that might be helpful. But I think the CV, you can just pretty much use the same one. There's no like rules, and you don't have to get like perfect headshots or anything. I don't think that actually helps.
All right. That's great. We learned a lot from you today, and I think that is toward the end of our interview today. And I would like to thank you for your time and like share your experience with us. We know more about how the transition from postdoc, from US, from other country, and really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahel.
Thank
Hope we
you.
can have you in the discussion panel as well. So that would be really good.
I hope so, but the time